Welcome to episode 377 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent here as always. And I used to say Trent and Jason here as always, but Jason stepped away from the podcast in mid-2021. But he has made his way back a few times, and today is one of those times. So welcome him back, Jason, to talk about the unfortunate passing of the mighty Gary Rossington, the guitarist, one of the guitarists, and one of the founding members of one of the greatest American rock and roll bands of all time, Lynyrd Skynyrd. Southern rock at its finest. It's a band that I believe everybody knows, even people that don't even listen to rock and roll. You could be into classical music or rap or country and country is another totally different thing because Lynyrd Skynyrd goes hand in hand with that as well, but you know what I'm saying. People that have nothing to do with rock and roll, no Sweet Home Alabama, and no Freebird. So that's how iconic this band was, and that's how it is, and that's how iconic Gary Rossington was and is as well. So we're going to talk about Gary, and we're going to talk about Skynyrd here coming up very shortly. But first I want to let you know who we're sponsored by. That would be DEB Concerts, concert promoter based right here in the Tulsa area, who has brought tons of great acts to our area here in downtown Tulsa. Bands like Saxon, Last in Line, LA Guns, Tom Kiefer, Buck Cherry, Lita Ford, even stuff to the arena down here at the BOK Center in Tulsa, like Lamb of God, Megadeth, Ice Cube, Snoop D-O-double-G, and so much more. DEB Concerts also books the Roadhouse stage at Rocklahoma every year. This year, of course, is no exception. The lineup for Rocklahoma was announced a few weeks ago, and the DEB sponsored Roadhouse stage features 4 nights, 4 days of action, starting with the Thursday night pre-party, which takes place on the Roadhouse stage. That will be headlined by Warrant. A couple members of that band have been on this podcast before. The other 3 nights will be headlined by Buck Cherry. Josh Todd has been on this podcast before. Kix, one of the greatest live bands you'll ever see. And every member of that band has been on this podcast. All at once, of course, but... And finally, Skid Row. No one from Skid Row has been on this podcast, unfortunately, but I'm guessing that will change one day. LA Guns will also be on that stage as well. Enough with saying who's been on this podcast. DEB Concerts on Twitter and Facebook is at DEB Concerts. Follow them on the socials so you don't miss any updates on upcoming stuff. We, of course, keep you updated here as well. And we appreciate DEB Concerts for everything they do. Sunset Tattoo, a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed. And they are mother approved. 25 plus years of experience from Jason Thompson, and you can see a collection of the Sunset Tattoo work on their socials. Facebook and Instagram are both Sunset Tattoo Tulsa. Tons of great styles that they specialize in. I've had tattoo work done by Jason Thompson. I love it. I know many other people that have as well, and I'm sure I will again here in the near future. And hopefully you will too. So if you give Sunset Tattoo a call or a message, you can set up a time to go in there, sit down and talk about what work you're looking to have done. They also accept walk-ins. So drop by Sunset Tattoo and tell them you heard about them on Thunder Underground. Finally, we've got Med Farm, a dispensary located in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, 24683 East Highway 51. They're right off the highway, right past Oneida Road. Can't miss them. They've got a drive-thru, which is a great convenient thing that many dispensaries don't have. If you call or text your order ahead of time, you can zip right through that drive-thru and be on your way. You can also check out their large selection at leafly.com. You can go in anytime and talk to one of their many knowledgeable staff. They are cannabis with a cause. That means 30% of their proceeds are going to build no-kill animal shelters. Such an amazing cause. Nearly a third of their proceeds at all times are going to help out animals and build no-kill animal shelters. Also, follow them on their socials. MedFarm, that's PHARM on Facebook, MedFarmOK on Instagram. The website is medfarmok.com. And if you mention Thunder Underground, they'll give you 10% off your first order. You can't beat that. So drop by MedFarm and tell them you heard about them on Thunder Underground. Alright, so once again, like I mentioned, Jason has returned a few times over the past year and a half, or a little over a year and a half since he departed the podcast. The first time he came back was actually for another tribute of a fallen rock and roll icon, and that was Taylor Hawkins of Foo Fighters about a year ago. And he also came back for our Best of 1992, 30 years later look back towards the end of last year. We're both big fans of the music that came out that year, so we wanted to do a kind of look back at all those albums from that year. And then just a few weeks ago, we had the episode where Jason came over and we watched Megadeth's live stream from Budokan in Japan when Marty Friedman made his return to Megadeth after 20 plus years. We did a talk and a review on that, and now here we are once again with Jason's returning to talk about Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I definitely wanted to have Jason on this one because as much as I love Lynyrd Skynyrd, Jason loves him a bit more. He's a little bit more knowledgeable, I think, about it, and especially when it comes to a guitarist. Jason has been a guitar player since we were teenagers. So he hears stuff a little bit different than I would, I believe, because of that. So I definitely wanted to have him on here to talk about that. And, throughout the years of this podcast, we've done many tributes, of course, because we've lost a ton of great musicians over the past 8 years that this podcast has been going. We've done tributes for guys like Lemmy, Chris Cornell, like I said, Taylor Hawkins. I mean, there's a long list. No need to get into. To me, I've done a few tributes for some guys on my own in the past, a couple that have passed since 2021, since Jason left. I always just find stuff like this is a little bit better when a couple people are talking about it, especially a tribute to a fallen artist or even a review of a show or anything like that, because you're getting the perspectives, two different perspectives. Like I said, people might hear things different. People relate to different songs, different aspects. So it's just always fun, regardless of that, to sit down and, talk back and forth about music you love with a friend of yours. So again, glad Jason's back so we could talk about Gary and Lynyrd Skynyrd. I don't need to really go into much because Jason and I cover it here, but we talk about seeing Skynyrd live, and I've had the opportunity. I was thinking about it. I think I've seen him 4 times. Actually, about 3.5 times. And oddly enough, 3 of the times were in the past, if I can do the math, 3.5 years. Me and Jason saw them back in the mid-90s. They did a co-headline tour with Hank Williams Jr. I think it was like 95. Maybe even 94. I don't remember for sure, but such an amazing show. It was just it was the time when both of us had really gotten into him. There were still several guys in the band that longtime members, of course, a couple of the early members, of course, passed away in that plane wreck, including, of course, Ronnie Van Zant. Gary, is an original member, and he is the last original member left that passed away. I believe Artemis Pyle is the last classic era lineup member that's left. Ricky Medlock is in the band now, and he was actually in the band for a short period in the 70s. Actually on the drums, which I don't know too much of the history of that, which I probably should have looked up, or should probably look up as soon as I finish recording this, now that I'm thinking of it. It's just something I've always known, but didn't really know the history of, like, he was a drummer then, is he, because we know him as a guitarist and, with the other work he's done, like with Blackfoot and stuff like that. So it's just cool to to think this guy's back in the band, playing a different instrument and doing it at an extremely high level. And he's playing alongside Damon Johnson, who has been on this podcast 6 times. One of my favorite musicians throughout the years, throughout my entire life. And he joined Lynyrd Skynyrd in 2021, I believe it was. And at first he did it just to. He didn't technically join the band, he was just filling in for Gary for a few shows as part of the tour that was going on. Because Gary was dealing with health issues, and he wasn't able to perform. He did a step back. But it was always under the assumption that Damon was just filling in until Gary came back. And then along 2022 came along, they had a full-scale tour like they always do. And Damon did it in its entirety. So then you started to believe maybe Gary was a little worse off than we realized. And of course, as time went on, you heard that fact. And then we unfortunately lost him here in early March. And Damon Johnson has, I think I mentioned it here when I talked to Jason, but last time, I think it was the last time Damon was on, probably about a year ago. It was like last spring, I think. And he spoke about him joining Lynyrd Skynyrd to, perform live with Lynyrd Skynyrd. And he spoke about how Gary actually personally asked him to fill in for him. And then, they became close over the time. They already knew each other, obviously, before that, became much closer. What kind of compliment is that? Where an all-time guitarist from an all-time legendary band ask you to be basically his successor now. But, at that point, his fill-in, I would assume that, as Damon spoke about it, that's an unbelievable honor. And as it is for, me to be able to talk to someone like Damon or be able to see Lynyrd Skynyrd live. And like I mentioned a minute ago, I'd seen him 3 times since they returned, and one of the times was with Damon. Just this past September, they played the Born and Raised Festival in Oklahoma. And I had the chance to see him out at that. They put on an excellent show, just like they always do. Tons of great, triple guitar work, just amazing classic rock, amazing southern rock. You can't go wrong with this band. Every freaking song is great. You go see them live. They're one of those bands where you go see live and even if you're a casual fan, you end up knowing 3/4 the set, which is the mark of an amazing legendary artist, right? So, with all that being said, I'm going to jump into this and let Jason and I do a little more talking here about Lynyrd Skynyrd and Gary Rossington. Welcome back once again to the show. Glad to have you back.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. And this time we're, as noted, talking about the passing of Gary Rossington.
Yes.
Kind of like a little tribute here to him, one of the founding members and the lead guitarist for the almighty Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Right.
I guess it's kind of kicking this off. I figured go back to not obviously the beginning of Skynyrd because that's whenever we weren't even born yet. But
right.
Go back to like kind of our beginning is that, like anybody listening to rock radio or getting into rock music, we all knew Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird.
Of course.
Everybody did, whether you listen to that or not. But I always liked your story that like you've talked about a few times on the podcast throughout the years is that kind of in the mid-90s.
Right.
Whenever the music scene changed is when you really kind of heavily got into a few bands and one of them was Skynyrd.
Definitely.
So kind of talk about that for
right. Well, it's like you said, we all knew of Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird, right? We all did. I had older brothers, and yes, they were mainly into like the country of the 80s and the outlaw country. But of course, that also leads you to Skynyrd. And so they always loved Skynyrd, but it was like, Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird. And then they just go back to their Hank Jr. and their Willie Nelson. So, you always heard those songs. But yes, when, when the early to mid 90s kicked in and the heavy music scene kind of started shifting to, grunge and alternative and a lot of that stuff. A lot of that stuff we loved, of course, but, and really when the mid 90s hit and things kind of got mundane with all the, just the Smashing Pumpkins and the Dishwalla and the fucking all that shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's like, and it's being, and you didn't have streaming and you didn't have, the internet on such a wide, technology on such a broad stage like you do now. It's like you got tired of some of that stuff. So what I did was I was like, I don't want to do this. This is not fun. This is bland. This is just boring. So I went back and, who are the bands I like, so I had all my favorite bands. And so I thought, well, let's go see who influenced them. And so I really, I got into early Kiss, because Kiss was kind of the same thing. You knew the hits.
Yeah. But,
I never really did a deep dive. So like early Kiss, their first record is so huge to me. And then Lynyrd Skynyrd, that was like, those are two bands that, I really just loved and just dove into. And so that was my stuff. That was my thing. And I really enjoyed so many, at the time, what I thought were Lynyrd Skynyrd deep cuts, but really they were just, Tuesday's Gone and Give Me Three Steps and,
right.
The stuff that was
just more hits,
that was more hits, that I come to find out the more I learned about this band and the more I dove into it. So yeah, but there's some songs that you don't hear all the time, like Swamp Music or, Working for MCA, that is just, it's just amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And, and to just bring that all home, I don't know if they're going to continue or not. I would assume they will because every band does. But really, with Gary Rossington passing away, it's kind of the end of an era. Artemis Pyle's still going, but, that guy's, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Verdict's out on that dude.
Right.
And he's not in Skynyrd, so it's really kind of the, end of an era.
Right. Yeah, I remember seeing right after he passed, comments on like social media and stuff. People were trying to argue, people were like, "It's the last founding member," and there were people trying to argue that Artemis Pyle's still alive, and they're like, "Well, he wasn't the original
founding though. It was that Bob Burns guy, right?
Yeah, he wasn't the original drummer.
Right.
Technically, he's in that classic era member, I guess, But so when you kind of dove into him, like you said, was it greatest hits albums, or did you kind of go like to the first couple albums, or do you remember?
Yeah, the first Lynyrd Skynyrd record I got was Live One More from the Road.
Oh, okay.
And I wore that out. And then I had a, excuse me, I know I had like a greatest hits record. And then from then it just went on and went out. So, yeah.
So speaking on Gary Rossington, like as a guitarist, when you started listening to that stuff,
right,
more deeply, what stood out to you about, I guess, the guitars in Skynyrd, or specifically him, if you could pinpoint it?
I think, you had all those dudes that I know, all of them soloed, whether it was, Alan Collins or Ed King, and all that kind of stuff. But I think, Gary Rossington's slide playing was just, it was iconic, and not just in Freebird, but, he had all that stuff. And that's kind of, I think that's what he will most be remembered by.
Yeah.
And I think he was just the, dude, he was always there. He was always the one that never changed.
Yeah.
They never had to replace him, and he never left and came back and all that kind of stuff. So, it was, just really the staple.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously that iconic opening to Freebird, that slide and everything, but
oh man,
everybody started talking about Simple Man a lot whenever he passed, because that's one he wrote.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, just recently on a podcast, I had Terry Ilou on, and he was talking about, I can't even remember what the subject was about writing. And he was talking about writing simply or simple stuff or whatever, and he brought up Simple Man. He's like, the song's so amazing. Talent-wise, it's beyond what most people can do, but yet it's so extremely simple at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that's where, and that's how you know, that's where it intersects, you know? I mean, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's stupid.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes the simplest stuff is the hardest to do.
Yeah. Very true. You know, one thing you mentioned is bands that you loved. Metallica is obviously one of them. Right. You know, was influenced by Skynyrd. COC, another one. Like, are there any specific guitarist of those bands you love or sense, you know, that you hear, you know, definite influence from Gary Rossington in?
Oh, I think so. I think you hear a lot of that kind of thing in Damon Johnson, Brother Kane, you know, who is, you know, taking Gary's place now.
Right.
And I think that you know, when you break down James Hetfield's softer playing, and even his the rare occurrences where he does take a solo, you know, it's very, you know, it's a lot more streamlined and blues based, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
So, man, I know there's more. It's just you got to put me on the spot, don't you?
Right.
I think early Ian Moore.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think there's a case to be made for that. So, yeah. You know, I'm sure there's more I could think of. Have maybe you'd give me these questions like this morning.
Right. Well, and speaking on that, kind of like you mentioned your brothers. I mean, there's very few artists, I think, that, you know, I mean, there's artists like Kiss or Alice Cooper, or the Stones, or the Beatles, who had this wide-ranging impact on all of the rock music, or even the Stones on other genres. But besides someone like the Stones or Beatles, there's not very many bands that out there like Skynyrd that influence like multiple genres.
Exactly.
You know, obviously country, obviously Southern rock more than anything, and then metal, and just rock in general.
Right, and I think that Lynyrd Skynyrd's influence on metal is probably a bit more prominent than some would think.
Yeah.
You might have to dig a little deeper, but I mean, it's there. Just some of the soloing, you know, the outro to That Smell, and just kind of the riffage of Working for MCA. I mean, you know, that is definitely an attitude that has influenced metal. And I mean, I don't care. I'll argue that all day.
Yeah.
It might be a little left field. I get it, but it's there.
Yeah.
And I think another guy that we haven't thought of, but I mean, is totally influenced by Rossington and Skynyrd is Zakk Wylde.
Oh, right.
I mean, you know, back in the day, he had a tribute band called Leonard Skinhead, for God's sakes.
Actually,
you know?
Wasn't that his original name for Pride and Glory, too?
Yeah, I think so. I think
is
so.
what he was trying to turn that into, and then I guess, obviously, smartly changed the name.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, Pepper Keenan's another one, too, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. And, completely. I mean, you could even kind of make a case for...
Dude,
not really like...
COC's cover of On the Hunt?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, get back, dude.
Yeah.
Come on.
Which, if you're listening, you hadn't heard that, it's not even, at least I haven't checked recently, but it's only available on, like, YouTube. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not on streaming services. Yeah. It wasn't released on an album. It was, I don't know what it was for, but you could find it on YouTube a few years ago. But, I mean, that's another kind of good point, is there's been tons of covers throughout the years that are great. I mean, like, obviously, Metallica did Tuesday's Gone. Shine Down had a huge hit with that stripped down version of Simple Man.
Yep.
And then I know someone did Give Me 3 Steps, like a country artist, I think, a while back that was pretty good. But, I mean, you hear that stuff all the time. And speaking on the country thing again, you know, I just saw him live. Well, obviously Gary Rossington wasn't there, but I saw him live just this past fall at Born and Raised, a country festival here in Oklahoma.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, they're the type of band that can headline a rock fest and then headline a Country Fest.
Exactly.
You know, and they opened with Working for MCA, by the way.
That's awesome.
But that kind of leads into also another thing is that we saw him live with Gary Rossington there.
Yes.
And it was like 95, 96, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At Fair Meadows. Right?
Yeah.
It's the old horse track in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, with Hank Jr.
Yeah. And that was
That was great.
quite a huge show.
I loved it.
You know, for us back then, that, you know, we had been to a few shows by that point, like headline gigs from Metallica or Guns N' Roses separately and stuff like that. But then, you know, that might have been the first like big double bill show I'd went to.
Yeah, and that was when you still had, you know, Gary Rossington, Leon Wilkeson, Billy Powell. They were still there.
That's what I was going to ask you, if you remember who all was still there at that point.
I'm pretty sure those three were. I think Michael Cardelloni by that time had taken over drums.
Okay.
Pretty sure Artemis Pyle was out. I think. I mean, dude, I don't know. It's been so long ago, but that's just seems like that's how I remember it.
Right. I mean, since Damon Johnson was in Damn Yankees for like 3 months,
right?
Like it's cool now that like two members of Damn Yankees, are part of Leonard Skinner.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think was Ed King there? I can't remember.
I feel like it, but again, I can't.
I don't know.
Remember for sure either.
Right.
Was that the only time you've seen him? Or
yes, that's the only time I've seen him. And
honestly, which is fine at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I saw him when he was still there a few years ago at Exo 111 Fest.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you already mentioned it, but that was another one of my questions. Not, do you think they will go on? Because I think they will.
Yeah. I'm
sure they will. Do you think they should? Because I know that's like one of those things. It's like, there's so many different aspects to that question.
Yeah.
Like I'm a hypocrite because I'll argue with some bands, absolutely, fuck you if you don't like, John Bush or whoever in a band, but or John Krabbe. But then I'm like, if they replaced Cornell and Soundgarden, I'd be like, fuck Kim Thale, even though I didn't truly mean it in my heart. But with Skinner, it's like, it happened over such a long progressed period of time.
Yeah.
And like, Johnny Van Zant's been leading that band now for fucking 40 plus years.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. But dude, I don't know, man. I really don't know.
And I mean,
I've thought about
Ricky Medlock, who was there in the early days.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, before all this started, before all this stuff with Gary Rossington started, they were calling it a farewell tour.
Oh, were they?
The farewell to something.
That's right.
But we know that none of that means anything ever.
Right.
Anymore. So I don't know. Should they? I don't know. There used to be a time where I was like, no, they shouldn't. These bands need to stop, blah, 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 blah. But now it's just so commonplace. I'm just like numb to it. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
There's no one left in Foreigner.
Right.
I don't know. And do you think for 1 minute Kiss is going to stop? Nope.
Right.
So I don't know, man.
I'm interested when that day comes, like how Paul Stanley's going to explain it, That's just all I'm waiting for.
Oh, yeah. They'll have some kind of spin on it.
I mean, like Motley Crue did the same thing with the spin on it. So, Paul Stanley claimed this is the end of the tour, like Ozzy said. It's like he's flat out said these are the final 2 Kiss shows.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, right.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah. And I'm 120 pounds soaking wet. Whatever, dude.
Right.
So I don't know if Lynyrd Skynyrd should or they will or won't, but it's definitely kind of an iconic mark, end of an era type kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And, this just happened. Well, by the time this airs, it's probably been about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're recording this, we're actually recording this on April 1st.
Right.
For transparency here. Tomorrow, April 2nd, is the 50th anniversary of the debut album.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he passed away just like a few weeks before
the
50th anniversary of the debut album.
It's a hell of a career, a hell of a body of work, man.
And you want to know how I found this out? Just a random news story coming through yesterday that the CMT Awards, which we all fucking love.
Oh, yeah.
Are tomorrow night, which it said lands on the 50th anniversary of the debut album, and they're having a big Skinner Gary Rossington tribute. I don't know if you've read about this.
Yeah, I did. I just did.
It's got some country guys, but then it's got
like Slash is going to be there or something.
Slash and Paul Rogers is one of the vocalists. It's like Paul Rogers and some like Cody Johnson or some country singer.
Yep.
And then like Slash and I think maybe Billy Gibbons and
a
couple other people from the rock world.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of cool and interesting, you know, that he pretty much made it, you know, to the 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
It's like Betty White, you know, passing away like
exactly
3 weeks before her 100th birthday.
Yeah.
You know? Just got to hope Bob Barker makes it this year.
Yeah.
To that 100.
No doubt. No doubt.
And you mentioned a few songs, you know, or like do you have an absolute favorite or like a 3 or 4?
Working for MCA.
That's the number one for
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite Leonard Skinner song. Excuse me. I mentioned it to Swamp Music. I love that. Coming Home, I think, is a great fucking song, dude.
Yeah.
Love that song. I'm sorry. What's the song? I know Zakk Wylde did a cover of it. I've never dreamed I wouldn't dream.
Yeah, I never dreamed.
I never dreamed. Yeah. I flubbed the title, but I love that song.
Yeah.
That's great. And, yeah, I mean, That Smell, I always thought was great. What's Your Name? I mean, dude, we should just go in now and listen to some Leonard Skinner. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give Me Back My Bullets. It's a great tune.
It is. And that's another thing that not funny, but it just, when you think of Southern rock, you think of the same way you do with a lot of country, 70s and 80s country, that good old boy, you know.
Right.
You know, fucking American pride.
Yeah.
You know, gun-toting kind of person. But, you know, Skinner, you know, has at least more than one song about gun control.
Exactly, which I love. And
like Saturday Night Special.
Yeah, you know? And also, think about, you know, I don't know if you ever, I don't know if I ever sent it to you, but the thing Ian Moore posted about Gary Rossington. Did you ever see that?
Right after he passed, I remember reading something.
The story. Well, we'll just recap it for the audience out there. Ian Moore, you know, posted a story about Gary Rossington when Gary Rossington passed away. How, you know, back in the late 90s, was it early 90s? I don't know, whatever. When Ian Moore was on tour opening for Leonard Skinner and Ted Nugent, that Gary Rossington and Ted Nugent couldn't be farther apart in their politics, their views, and they didn't really mesh. But at one point in the tour, something happened to Ted Nugent's Birdland guitar. It broke in half, or, you know, whatever, it wasn't playable. And no matter what, Gary Rossington was just so, he was so broken up that Ted lost his guitar and broke his guitar that he went and bought a brand new one and had it, you know, and presented it to Ted. So I thought that was a good story. You know, probably one that, you know, everyone in the country right now needs to, like, you know, take a cue from.
Right.
But whatever, we won't get into that. But it was a very nice story, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading that one. And there was you know, kind of like we got whenever Eddie and a few other people passed, you know, there was a lot of great stories from musicians coming out.
Right.
You know, about Gary Rossington. One note, a song that hasn't been mentioned at all that I absolutely love is the Ballad of Curtis Lowe.
Oh, man, that's such a great tune.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was my next question to you. You know, what are some of your tunes? I just railed off some.
Well, like I said, Ballad of Curtis Lowe, Tuesday's Gone, Simple. I mean, the ballads, to me, are so fucking great no matter what.
Yeah, they are epic. Very epic. And
then when it comes to the bigger hits, probably Give Me 3 Steps.
Right.
Is probably my favorite. To me, Freebird is one of those songs. There's a collection, you know, of 20, 30 songs that, like, everyone in the world knows when it comes to classic rock that you've heard 50 billion times in your life.
Yes. And
of those, probably 20 out of the 30, I could be fine with never hearing Carry On My Wayward Son again in my life.
Exactly, yeah.
But
for some reason, we always still blare Freebird.
Freebird and Don't Stop Believing and Sweet Child of Mine are 3 of those overplayed the fuck songs that I could just, it comes on right now, I'm not going to change the channel.
Right.
You know, or I'm not going to flip it to the next song on Spotify. It's just, it's so iconic that it just never got old to me. You know?
Yeah. I even just bought that box set they put out in the 90s.
Yeah.
I just got that on cassette.
That's amazing.
From eBay for only $30.
I remember you sent me that before you bought it. You sent me that link, but
I just decided, whatever, just do it.
Yeah, I'm still. What's it called again? The box set? Do you remember?
God, I can't even.
Okay,
can't even remember.
I've got it on CD.
The CD,
yeah. I got it back in the 90s.
And when I got it, the tapes were sealed. I don't know if somebody did that or if that's really sealed. I would imagine somebody had sealed them.
Oh yeah,
resealed them. I mean,
right. I guess that covers it. I don't know. Do you have anything else to to add about Skinner? Or
No, I'm good. I think we got it.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. A big shout out to Gary Rossington and all the, obviously, every other member of Skinner that we've lost throughout the years now. And,
that's right.
You know, I mean, they're still going on with our friend of the podcast, Damon Johnson, as you mentioned.
Yes.
I mean, and that, if you haven't heard it, you know, I mean, I'll probably mention it in the outro, the actual number, but Damon Johnson has been on here like 6 times now. And one of the times about a year ago, he talked in detail about how he ended up joining Skinner, which was actually directly from Gary Rossington asking him to do it.
That's cool.
You know, because he took Gary Rossington's spot when Gary got sick and couldn't perform.
Mm-hmm.
And he was asked directly by Gary Rossington, and they became great friends over that process. And, you know, he's another person you should look on his social media. Around the time Gary passed, a few days after, he posted several stories and great stuff. So,
yeah. That's heavy. That's not something to be taken lightly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just slight tangent, but I mean, think this guy has now been in 2 of his 3 favorite bands. You know, who could say that? You know, some people could grow up, you know, and end up in their favorite band, you know, like, you know, freaking Ripper Owens did it, you know, and other people have done it throughout the years, but to get to a point where you join Thin Lizzy and then you join, you know, Leonard Skinner.
And Alice Cooper.
Oh, and Alice Cooper. Yeah, so 3 of his probably top 4 or 5. He didn't never get to join Van Halen, but obviously who's going to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But right on, yeah. Thanks again for that's doing this.
Hell yeah.
Well, there you go. Jason Wood made his return to the podcast so he could talk about Gary Rossington and Leonard Skinner, pay a little tribute to one of the all-time greats. A huge thank you to Jason for making his way back, like I mentioned earlier. You know, he is a co-founder of Thunder Underground, dating back to the 90s. That's something I hadn't talked about in a while, and I talked about recently, 2 weeks ago on the Dean Castronovo episode, which as I was recording, I was speaking out loud and remembering something that never somehow didn't cross my mind when I was, coming up with stuff to talk to Dean about. Dean played the drums on the Ozzy Osbourne song Thunder Underground, which is what we took as the name for this. In the 90s, it was a local fanzine that we put together and put at some local record shops around here. And then after a few years, when that kind of died out, we brought back Thunder Underground probably about 10, 12 years ago now, just on social media. And then we stepped into the podcast game about 8 years ago. And then Jason was here doing it with me for over 6 years, I believe. Yeah, because it was up through mid-2021. And he's come back here now for the 4th time. So if you missed any of those other returns, he came back for a review of a Megadeth live stream, a tribute to Taylor Hawkins, and a review of the music of 1992. So all those are stuff that's happened in the past year or so that you could check out as well. You could also check out previous episodes. Like when I talked about some tributes we've done in the past, I did not mention the Eddie Van Halen tribute, which was episode 292, I think. And that stands as, people ask the question a lot, like, what's your favorite episode? What's your favorite interview or the best this and that, And I've always got a collection of the interviews I'll bring up, but I wouldn't say that's my favorite episode because I don't want losing Eddie Van Halen and having to talk about it. It's not a favorite of anything. This is like one of the all-time greatest musicians to ever live on this fucking earth. Gave us some of the greatest music of all time, the same way that Gary Rossington did with Leonard Skinner. But we put together a nearly 3.5-hour tribute episode to Eddie Van Halen, where we had 14 guests on it. Jason and I both talked for quite a while about our thoughts on Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen, and then we brought in, like I said, 14 guys to talk about Eddie Van Halen. And Damon Johnson, who I mentioned earlier, and we mentioned throughout that, the current guitarist in Leonard Skinner who filled Gary Rossington's spot at the request of Gary Rossington, was one of the members or one of the artists that joined us on that episode to talk about Eddie Van Halen. Along with Frank Cannon of Tesla, Mitch Perry, another amazing guitarist. We also had on Paige Hamilton of Helmet. Who else was on that? Micah Riza of Healing the Fray and the Fa and Frank Cannon Band. CJ McClellan, one of our good friends of the podcast and just outside the podcast here in the Tulsa area from the band Grind, and he's got a new band that should be coming out very soon. We also had, why am I drawing a blank? Let me think here. Robin McCauley was on that. Mark Slaughter was on that. Both those guys, Robin McCauley and Mark Slaughter, were on here other times as well for their full, their own episodes, as well as guys from Tesla, Warrant, Great White, Megadeth. Ron Keel has been on here a couple times, and Ron Keel is a massive fan of Lynyrd Skynyrd. We've also had on guys from Three Doors Down. That's a band I believe has toured with Lynyrd Skynyrd at one point. I could be wrong about that, but for some reason I'm thinking that in my mind. Like I said, recently Dean Castronova was on here. Phil Lewis of LA Guns returned. He's been on here a couple times along with Tracy Guns of LA Guns. I've also had on some heavy stuff like, I think I mentioned Megadeth, but Testament, the Black Dahlia Murder, Killswitch Engage, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, Jeff Tate, the original vocalist of Queensryche, Shooter Jennings, a long-ass list. You can check it all out at thethunderunderground.com. You can listen directly there. You can also listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard, like Spotify and everywhere else, wherever you're listening right now. Follow, like, or subscribe this podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Also, there on the website, you can see all our socials, so follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Anytime you see a post, hit like, comment on it, share it. That's an easy, free way to help out this podcast. An easy monetary way to help out this podcast is to buy some merch. I've got t-shirts, koozies, shot glasses, magnets, stickers, guitar picks, all that great stuff. Or just send cash to Thunder Underground. I don't know. But we've got great sponsors for that, right? Got some great stuff in the works. Talk about it when it happens. Coming up here in less than a month now, mid-May, is the 8th year anniversary of this podcast. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, that's just wild to think about. That 8 years ago, Jason said we should start a podcast, and we did it. And here we are, 8 years later, with all those guys I just mentioned, and guys like Glenn Hughes. The fact that, I got to talk to Glenn Hughes for 30 minutes, or I got to sit down with Joey Allen from Warrant, or sit down with CJ Pierce of Drowning Pool, or just any of these guys, that are exceptional, just amazing human beings to sit down and talk to. Speaking of that, Mark Torian of the Bullet Boys, is similar to Phil Lewis, where he's just an exceptional guy to talk to, which is just blew my mind, because you always heard so much stuff in the past about how he wasn't, but he defied that from my experience. So anyway, look back through all that great stuff if you have not. I appreciate you listening, as always. Appreciate Jason coming back, as always. I'm sure he'll be back again here before you know it. In the meantime, check out those previous episodes. Whatever you're listening to, shoot us a message here, thethunderunderground@gmail.com, or on any of the socials. Tell us what you're digging. Yeah, I didn't have anywhere else to go with that. I just thought I'd throw that in. So, there you go. I'm going to wrap this up. A huge thank you to Med Farm, DEB Concerts, and Sunset Tattoo. Once again, a huge thank you to Jason. And once again, a big rest in peace to the mighty Gary Rossington. Until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.